This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, this is Alexandra, and normally when I record interviews or my solo episodes on the Marriage Podcast, I do the recordings 3 weeks in advance. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 months. I like to prepare and give my team plenty of time to edit, but we're not doing it that way today. In fact, I'm recording now and you'll be able to listen to this episode in 28 hours. My team is amazing in stepping up to make this possible, and it is because there is some big news in the world of marriages and society and people who are influential. Because I just heard a very short while ago that Bill and Melinda Gates are getting divorced. Now, on the one hand, what's the big deal? On the other hand, it's a really big deal because human beings are mammals and mammals learn through imitation. So when we hear about someone doing something, it filters into our unconscious. It creates muscle memory. It makes things more appealing or more permissible or just more available to us. So is the Gates' personal life that significant for any of us? No, probably not. But as one of the most famous couples in the entire world, their decision to get divorced has an impact. It has an imprint. Just like Jeff Bezos and his wife's divorce also made the headlines. So I'm not really gonna say that much about the Gates personally. I've never coached them. I don't know them personally. If you keep listening, you'll hear, I kind of wish I'd had an opportunity. No, not kind of. I definitely wish I had had an opportunity to coach them, and maybe this would have unfolded in another way. But I do want to take the opportunity to share my thoughts, which are inspired by this news. So if you haven't heard it yet, what they did on Twitter was release the following statement. After a great deal of thought and a lot of work on our relationship, we have made the decision to end our marriage. We have raised 3 incredible children and built a foundation that works all over the world to enable all people to lead healthy, productive lives. We continue to share a belief in that mission and will continue our work together at the foundation. But we no longer believe we can grow together as a couple in this next phase of our lives. We ask for space and privacy for our family as we begin to navigate this new life. Honestly, as communications about divorce go, that is a pretty elegant communication. For those of you who may not realize it, they have been married for 27 years. And in fact, in Melinda Gates' book, The Lift, I don't have it in front of me. I'm pretty sure that's the title, but honestly, it might not be. But Lift is definitely in the title. She shares that initially they weren't sure they were going to get married. And it wasn't because Bill wasn't interested in Melinda. He definitely was. It was more that he wasn't sure if marriage would work for him because of his deep commitment to Microsoft and his business responsibilities and opportunities. And there's this funny story about how Bill used a whiteboard and made the pros and cons, laid them out in his very analytical manner, and then clearly decided that, yes, it would be the right decision to get married. People close to them have said that they've really faced some intense relationship struggles over the past several years, and they came close to divorce in the past, but then came back from it. But now they're continuing to proceed and go ahead and get divorced. The one statement that I found when quickly researching this, which really caught my attention, is that one of the things Melinda said is working together at the foundation had made their relationship a lot better. Quote, he's had to learn how to be an equal And I've had to learn how to step up and be an equal. And I think that's super telling. I mean, I don't have more information, but that points to a phenomenon among couples who've been together a long time. Now, before I say anything more about the Gates, I want to share that there's this phenomenon. It's called gray divorce, meaning adults in the United States who are age 50 and older. That's what is referred to as gray divorce. And the divorce rate for adults age 50 and older has roughly doubled since the 1990s. So you've probably heard the statistic that 50% of first marriages end in divorce, 60% of second marriages, 73% of third marriages, kind of intense. But those statistics are actually a little bit outdated because as millennials are postponing their marriages and being more intentional, more deliberate, they're marrying later, and it has the natural consequence that there are fewer divorces, because if they had married earlier and got divorced, then the rates would be higher. So the divorce rates in the United States in general are decreasing by significant percentages. However, the divorce rate among individuals 50 and older, baby boomers, is definitely on the rise. And when a couple that has been married for 27 years, 35 years, 45 years gets divorced, there's something that is really kind of sad and intriguing. It actually reminds me when my husband and I had been married, let's see, maybe we'd been married 3 years. And my husband mentioned to one of his relatives that we were working with a couples coach. And this relative, who was just a few years younger than we are, said to him, "Really? It seems like you figured marriage out." Like, he was very surprised because we were happy together. We'd been together for 3 years. Like, we seem to have figured it out. Why were we seeing a therapist? Well, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming that that wouldn't be so surprising to you, because marriage is an evolutionary process. A committed relationship is truly an opportunity for growth and expansion, and it is also part and parcel an opportunity for misunderstandings, miscommunication, unresolved childhood wounds flaring up both consciously and unconsciously. And marriage is something that requires tending. In fact, I think one of the biggest radical epiphanies for me when I became an adult was to realize that adults don't know as much as I thought they did when I was a child. I mean, there are plenty of times when I thought the adults around me didn't really know things, but I think I thought in general that adults have some understanding that matches their level of responsibility and engagement with the world. And when it comes to marriage, that definitely is not necessarily true. When you look at the research on why it is that gray divorce is on the rise, there are many different reasons, from undiagnosed mental health issues to affairs to the failure of therapy and counseling, which honestly is a serious one, because about 75% of the couples who seek out therapy in order to save their marriage end up getting divorced anyway. It's why I really very strongly distinguish therapy and coaching. We don't actually have data on coaching to the extent that we have data on therapy, so it's not totally a fair comparison, but I know that the data for my clients is infinitely superior to that of the data for therapists. Anyway, one of the reasons that gray divorce exists is a lack of mutual growth. Meaning, for one person, personal growth is a lifelong process and it really never stops. And for the other person, maybe they've thrown themselves into their career, and when they retire, they just put their feet up and they're done growing and evolving. I actually hear this from women in their mid 60s, 70s, this kind of conundrum because they love their husbands. They've built a life together, but they're not done with life. They want to keep going, and they're kind of missing a partner in participating in that. And if it's one with an expiration date, then you end up encountering this kind of challenge. If the foundation of the relationship is what my husband and I share, namely a devotion to our own and one another's personal growth, well, that's never going to expire. But if your reason for being together is because you grew up in the same town, well, that could work. There's some couples who could have that as a basis for 50, 60 years together. But for some others, that's really just not going to provide adequate glue and support and inspiration for the relationship. Another reason or foundation for marriage that occurs commonly is raising children together. So when the children are young, even when they're teenagers, perhaps challenging, perhaps not, caring for the children together provides a collaborative context which really strengthens the marriage, which is beautiful. But it's not so beautiful if that is kind of the main thing that keeps a couple together, because when the children grow up and do what is normal and move out of their home, then they're left looking at one another without a whole lot in common. So the point I really want to make is, if Bill and Melinda Gates' divorce impacts you at all, let it be a call to action to really clarify, refine, and discuss with your partner what the foundation of your relationship is. And if you're not sure yet, well, for one thing, go ahead and enroll in the Aligned in Hot Marriage program. That's my signature program, which brings emotional connection, which naturally leads to sensual passion through teaching couples how to communicate and clarify and put attention on the important things. Because so often you get into the mundane day-to-day. That's good for the short term, but for the long term, it is so important to really have your attention on the things that matter for a life of passion and devotion and adventure together. The other thing that I invite you to consider when you hear about Bill and Melinda Gates is to know that it pretty much didn't have to go that way. Now, I don't know them personally, so I want to have a caveat. Maybe if I'd coached them, I would have come to the same conclusion. But I want to tell you a story about a couple that I met about a year ago. They have been married, I guess it's 40 years now. When I met them, they had been married for 39 years. They live in Kentucky, and I actually met one of their sons at a conference, and we got to talking, and he encouraged his parents to reach out, and we had a conversation. And let me just set the stage. They'd been married for 39 years. Neither one of them had ever done any kind of coaching, personal therapy, either together or separately. They had taken the lessons from their childhood about how to be in a marriage and given it their all. And 39 years in, with a number of children and a few grandchildren, there were some misunderstandings that had been kind of buried that kind of came into the foreground of their relationship. And after a lot of years, like 38 and a half years of compromise and conflict-free relating and keeping the peace and putting their own needs aside, it was time for both of them to just express what they needed in a kind of unconscious, chaotic, and hurtful way. So we had a conversation, and I asked them what was going on. I asked them about their marriage from the time that they first met through the years. I didn't hear about all of the years, of course. This conversation was about 45 minutes, but I understood what had occurred because their relationship was set up with a certain dynamic. And they both had compromised and accommodated this dynamic. and focused on raising children and working and participating in their church activities. And now here they were, and none of those things were enough to keep a lid on these raw emotions that were emerging. And I spoke with them. And by the end of that conversation, they each had a new perspective, hope, and an emerging inner peacefulness. I asked them to get a copy of my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, and for each of them to read it. And then I spoke with them again 10 days later. Now, this couple had really been having a challenging time before our first conversation. And when I spoke with them 10 days later, they'd had some of the most beautiful moments of their whole 39-year marriage. They loved my book. They did a number of the exercises at the end of the chapters, and they were envisioning a new foundation and a new for their marriage and a new way of engaging with one another. And it truly was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, because it is absolutely my conviction that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And I am devoted to making that education available to anybody who wants it. And I have a feeling that if Bill and Melinda Gates wanted it, they would have been able to work this through, because based on the interviews, there weren't any new issues. What they needed was a new way of understanding the issues and relating to one another. I, of course, can't know for sure, but it does inspire me to think deeply about this. And if you are 50 and older with a marriage which is 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 years long, please read my book, Uncompromising Intimacy. And if you want any support whatsoever in really having a juicy, nourishing relationship, be sure to join me in the Aligned in Hot Marriage program. I'd love to hear what's happening in your marriage and serve you in any way you desire. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.